Let me get Glad to have you here. And again, if you're going to watch this a little bit later on, we are starting tonight in Job chapter 6. And we're just going to see how far along we can go, as we have been. We just got finished talking about Eliphaz, who probably was the older of the three friends, trying to give Job some advice. Hopefully before the night's over, as we look at Job's response to Eliphaz, we're also going to get on into Bildad. And Bildad seems to be the guy that, if you're looking at all of them together, he's looking at it from what he considers to be a practical point of view. And then as we look at it, we'll get on into the last one. But like I said, this is what's going on here now. We're picking up with Job chapter 6. In Job chapter 6, Job mainly talks to his friends. In Job chapter 7, he switches gear and he speaks directly to God. So we're going to hear a lot from Job in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different circumstances. And that's the thing we've got to keep in mind as we're reading through all of this. Before we go any further, let's pray. We're grateful, Father, for this day. We're grateful for the students that are here. We're grateful for those that might watch this video. And we ask you, Father, that above all, that we would think about the fact that a lot of people have a lot of different ideas about you and your will and what you ought to be doing and how you ought to be doing it. Father, I'm sure that Job, maybe before all this happened, had some definite ideas about you, but after you allowing him to go through all the problems and trials, he comes out stronger. And his faith in you holds fast. We are aware, Father, of many that have walked away from you because of the way people act, because we as Christians don't always shine as lights to the world. We're not always the salt of the earth. We sometimes want to win arguments and not win souls and not lead them to you. We humbly ask you, Father, that you would help us to do better and help us to realize what our responsibilities are. And more than that, Father, help us to be close to you, to be like Job, and no matter what the circumstance in our life, that we could trust that you're going to do what's right. You're always going to do what's best. Father, just to hang in there no matter what. We know the world is throwing a lot at us right now. We know, Father, that we need you more than ever. And Father, we just humbly ask you to please be with us. Take care of us. Strengthen us. Bless our studies. In Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So we have, as I said earlier, we have looked at Eliphaz's speech. This is where Job begins to speak to Eliphaz's speech. And we also remember the idea that Eliphaz had encouraged Job to repent. But we noticed in chapters 1 and 2 that God himself had said that Job was a righteous man, that there was no one like Job on the planet as he's talking to Satan. And so as Job and his three friends are struggling to figure out why, which is a question that all of us have to try to figure out or are working on trying to figure out to the best of our abilities, Job is saying, look, I have not done anything to cause, or I haven't done anything that I should repent of. And so in these next two chapters, he's going to give us Eliphaz's speech. So in chapter 6, verses 1 through 7, Job begins by emphasizing or justifying his grief and impatience. He says there, chapter 6, verse 1, oh, that my vexation, the King James says, my grief was thoroughly weighed and my calamity laid in the balances together. And all my calamity laid in the balances. The ideal is he's expressing his desire. He listens to these charges by Eliphaz. And we're going to see all through this book, he's going to be listening to all of them as well. And he says he's waited patiently, and now he answers very passionately about how it's going on. And he says, in essence, what he's saying here, I want you to know what I'm really going through. You're making assumptions about me, Eliphaz. You're making assumptions about me that may not be the truth. And the reality is you need to understand that this is the way it is. So you've laid charge against me. And again, before it's over with, the others are going to do the same thing. He had waited patiently, and now he's just saying, he said, I just really wish you know what I'm going through. Now, I don't think he's asking that their children be killed. I don't think he's asking that they lose all their wealth. I think he's just saying, in essence, I wish I could take all my grief, put it in a balance, and then his calamity, talk about what he had before and what he has now, and his grief way outweighs everything he had before. And so if you could ever really get across that ideal, I think is what he's trying to get across. You don't understand because you've not been through it. He said, if I could do that, it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. He says, therefore my words have been rash for the spirit. Rash.
Like extreme.
Yeah. Yeah. Because again, he's speaking out of feelings and emotions more than he's thinking about what he's going to say before he says it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the reason is because whenever you're in an emotional state, you're going to be talking more out of an emotional state, and you're going to have a lot more emotions in that whole situation.
Yeah.
So that's what he's saying here. He says, if you were to weigh it all out, if you consider the weight, think about this. And there's the way he's looking at it. He said it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. I think some of us have always picked up maybe bags of sand or, a bucket of sand. That stuff is heavy, and especially when it's wet, right?
They do it in the army. They make them carry it.
Yeah, they make it carry the sand in the army. That builds muscles and everything like that. But it's also sometimes disciplinary.
Yeah.
Let's be honest about that too. So the thing is, he says, if you take the sand of the sea, which would be soaking, if you take every bit of it and weigh it, and he says, in essence, all the things I've been through are heavier than the sands of the sea.
When we think of grief, we think of grief mainly about the dead. When it said mourn,
Mm-hmm.
and I think people get that the wrong way, like mourn, like it, because it says mourn like when they were sinning or whatever or not. I remember the one instance where it said God told the guy, go and mark these people that are mourning,
Mm-hmm.
and then you go kill them, the ones that are not, or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. I can't remember where that's from, but
Okay.
the mourning,
Yeah,
like the word, and we
Yeah.
take that to mean like mourning, like death.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I think it's something different, more there, because if it's
Yeah.
mourning towards God, it's not mourning like a person's died. It's like mourning like a repentance.
Well, number one, it depends on the context of where the word's found.
Yeah.
If they could be mourning over their sins, that's right. They could be weeping and grieved over sins in their lives. They could, as in Job's case, be weeping over the loss of loved ones.
What do you
Okay.
think he's talking about here?
Huh?
What
I think in the context of everything, think about he's lost everything.
he says that my grief will fully weigh.
Yeah. And I think that's the point he's trying to make. He says, all of this has happened. It's heavier than the sands of the seas. That's the reason why my words have been rash, in the fact that maybe I've come across too harsh, but I want you to understand this is how I feel.
The gravity of the situation.
The gravity of the situation. And again, his three friends don't understand because, as far as we know, none of them have been hit with the same things that Job has been hit with. Loss of wealth, loss of everything, servants, loss of family members, all at once, for no reason whatsoever other than the fact that in this situation at that point in time, he's dealing with what he's having to deal with. So going back again to Job chapter 6, picking up with verse 3, as he continues to struggle with that, he just says, I want you to understand that you, my friends, do not understand the weight of my sorrow. You don't understand it. And so by using this phrase, he's saying, in essence, you don't understand it, but also
Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. By grace you saved. And it's also stated there, I think in verse 5, Ephesians chapter 2. And so here is the peace. My peace I leave with you, Jesus said. All right, verse 3.
Okay, take just a second here.
They apparently had arrows right then. Or, well.
Okay, so hopefully he'll figure out what's going on there. Okay.
Oh, laborer. Well,
Okay. So let me go on back here a minute here. I'm going to cut him off and we'll pick up. Where was I?
You know, one thing about the Old Testament too, though, I noticed is like there's some, well, I guess it's a Jesus metaphors.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like I would have never guessed that the ox, do you saw how muzzle the ox treads the grain? I would have never guessed that meant like don't, like not like not taking care of the servant and giving them their money.
Mm-hmm.
Like
That's exactly right.
that's what they explained it in the New Testament. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I would have never thought that.
Okay. Hopefully everybody's able to hear this now. If not, I'll redo it later. Just trying to get everybody caught up on what's going on. We are in Job chapter 6, and Job is answering Eliphaz. And in this particular circumstance, as I said earlier, he said, I wish you could see how heavy my grief is. It's heavier, chapter 6, verse 2, than all the sand of the sea, the wet sand. And he says, then my words have been rash. He goes on in verse 4, and he emphasizes the idea the arrows of the Almighty are within me, and the terrors of God set themselves in array against me. He said, my spirit drinks their poison. The terrors of God are arrayed against me. So the ideal I think he's trying to get at here is not bad enough that he had troubles, but it seems like that God inflicted these sorrows deeply. Let's see, I've lost track here just a second. Yeah, it seems like that God has inflicted them and there was no reason for it. That's the things he's struggling with the most. He's trying to figure out, why am I going through that? And further, not only does he not understand why God has done this, but his friends don't understand it either. His friends are accusing him of things that he has not done wrong, trying to, and they're going to get specific, like I said later in the book, and actually say what's going on in that respect. These friends do not understand his sorrow. And so, as I said, he's trying to emphasize to them his grief so that they might have some pity on him. He's excusing himself. And he's saying, in essence, what? I'm saying these things because of my grief. And there's a little bit of a reproach to his friends here, like, toward the greatness of his grief. You don't know what I'm going through. So you are trying to make me feel guilty for something I have not done. And I don't need that on top of everything else. I don't need, and personally, as a preacher and so forth, I kind of think that Job, as he's making these statements, has already done a huge self-evaluation to see if there was something that he might have done to cause God to do something like this. He is trying to understand. He is trying to come to grips with this. And so far, he hasn't come up with nothing. He can't sit down and say, I've done this or this, and that's the reason why God did it. He has no clue why all this is going on. And that's what makes this story, again, so interesting, is the fact that bad things are going to happen to good people. And a lot of times people will make assumptions that that person must have sinned in some way. I do remember years ago listening to my grandmother talk about somebody who went through a lot of things in their life. She actually said, well, she must have done something pretty bad for all these things to happen to her in that way. And that idea is still with us today.
So that's why they put this book in
there. And I think that's part of the reason why God put this book in here. Also,
the disciples thought that too, though.
Yeah, the disciples.
I mean, the disciples did say, well, what was wrong with this guy? What did he do?
Right.
And Jesus said, well, this guy has this ailment because so he could show the power of God.
Show the power of God, which had nothing whatsoever to do with any sin.
But they sometimes did.
Sometimes it did. We're not going to argue that.
Yeah.
We're not going to argue that at all. We do remember the fact that, and I think I've mentioned this before in the class, that God sent the 10 plagues on Egypt, and that was sent as a punishment on Egypt. And part of the plagues were boils and things along that line. So,
similar to this.
huh?
It was similar to this.
Yeah, much similar to this, only an entire nation. The
Yeah.
Egyptians were having to go through all of this. So we pick up again with verse 4, and he says, the arrows of the Almighty are within me. The poison whereof drinketh up my spirit, the terrors of God set themselves in array against me. Now, as you're looking at this passage in verse 4, he says, the terrors of the Lord. The word array suggests the ideal of God being a general leading his armies
Against him.
So you've got,
That's the arrows too, though.
yeah, and that's the arrows as well. So it's not bad enough that he had troubles, but it seems like, according to Job, that God has inflicted these sorrows for some unknown reason. Okay, and they hurt deeply, and he's not understanding why. There's other passages in the Bible that does emphasize the fact what you said earlier. Psalms 38 verse 2, Psalms or Deuteronomy 32 23 and 42.
Which part?
Huh?
Which part? You said it emphasizes what?
It emphasizes that God does inflict sorrow and pain and heartache on people that are wicked. So he goes on and think about this, but he says, going back to verse 4, my spirit drinks their poison. Think about that idea. These arrows seem to be poison arrows to Job. It goes deep into his heart. It's not just an outside thing. This is going to his very heart.
But he doesn't know who the devil is. I mean, it seems so.
He doesn't know that the devil, I'm sure that he knows that the devil is there. I don't believe that he knew, as we talked about before, the discussion between Satan and God in Genesis or Job chapters 1 and 2.
But they know that the devil exists.
Yeah.
Okay.
In all probability, they do. Now, what their conception of the devil
is not full.
Was not full at this particular time. But then I often think about the idea that as we read through the Bible about all the passages that deal with Satan and what Satan does, I don't know that we've got it all figured out either.
Yeah.
There's no way, because they're spirit beings, and so
like Job.
Yeah. So we're flailing around like Job somewhat. You're exactly right, brother, in the fact trying to figure this stuff out. So it's not just the pain that he's going through because of the boils or the heartache that he's going through because of the loss of his family and wealth, but it's also these things are attacking his spirit. He's losing control. He's lost control. Most men want some level of control. A lot of women want some level of control. They want to be able.
He's gonna die.
Huh?
You think he thinks he's gonna die?
It's possible, yeah. Especially again, as this thing continues to linger, as they have this whole discussion through 42 chapters, he's not sure what's going to happen. So that's what's going on here. And so he's given it. And so what is he saying? God's terrors, so think about, as we go through this, he says, I'd like to have a good night's sleep, but I have dreams in the middle of the night. And again, part of that's possibly because of the physical ailment he's going through, the fever, the feverishness. You can't sleep that well. You can't get comfortable. And then on top of everything else, when you do sleep, your mind.
It's not good sleep.
It's not good sleep. You can't get it. Your mind is just going through all of these scenarios, and you start then what?
Nightmares.
Yeah. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And that's what he says. So he is in essence saying this, as I said earlier, they set themselves in array against me. Look in verse 5 now. Does the wild donkey bray when he has grass, or the ox low over his fodder?
What's a fodder?
Fodder would be hay. Okay, that's kind of what it boils down to. So when an animal such as a donkey or an ox has food, they don't complain.
Yeah.
It isn't that, it's whenever they're not being fed that they bellow. And again, growing up on a farm, especially all through the days during the summer, spring, summer, and on into the fall, cattle can eat grass, and you don't hear them being upset about anything. But whenever winter comes, there's no grass to eat. There's no leaves on the tree to eat. They expect to be fed with the hay. And I remember on numerous occasions taking hay out to the fields to feed the cattle. And the whole time, every one of them be mooing, wanting something because they knew it was time to eat. So if you can't picture that ideal in your mind, again, just try to think of a dog whenever it's time to eat. You know, they let you know whenever they're hungry. So the thing is that he's saying here, he said this, you know, a wild donkey does not bray when he has grass. An ox does not go over the fodder. They don't bellow and cry. But while Job was blessed, he didn't cry as some would. He didn't complain, but now he's wretched. He didn't have much food. And if the animals have the right to complain, in essence, what's he saying? Do I not have the right to complain? If the lowly animals that are below me can complain about certain things, why can't I complain? Now, we also know as we come to the New Testament, we find the Apostle Paul saying, do all things without murmuring and complaining. Okay. And think about it in our own lives as we meditate upon this. We do have a,
Yeah. Still a little different.
Right. But you also think about it.
That sense of righteousness is a little different from righteousness.
Right.
I mean, you got to go up there and go and put the unblemished animal to the priest, and they got to go and sacrifice it on the altar.
Right.
It's a little bit different.
It was a different situation in the Old Testament as they offered those sacrifices. But it also probably was more visual for them in the fact that when they actually saw the animal die, they should think to themselves, I should be the one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And therefore, this innocent had to die for the guilty.
But isn't like the animal, slaying the animal, where like the idea was to take something that you needed and you loved and give it to God?
That was part of it too.
And then they started selling them in there, and it was like, this is wrong.
Yeah. That's exactly one of the things that Jesus condemned. The reason why at the very beginning of his ministry and the end of his ministry, he cleansed the temple.
Yeah.
Okay. So as Job continues to talk about this, he talks about the unsavory nature of food, verse 6. He says, in essence, can that which is tasteless be eaten without salt? Is there any taste in the juice of the mallow? I'm reading here from the English Standard Version. Mm-hmm. The King James Version puts it this way: is there any taste in the white of an egg? So what did it originally say then? Because they translated it different. And what were we? Is it just mean like it was probably just a generic version for food? Well, it is definite toward this end. In other words, he's saying, you know, sometimes some food doesn't taste good without salt. Yeah. Right. And he's drawn a parallel here. He's drawn a parallel. The nature of the trials that I'm going through, I don't understand why I'm going through it. Can you eat anything that tastes bad without salt? I grew up, again, I watched my dad, and of course he used to take salt tablets and things along that line, and he would sit there and take salt and just pop it in his hand and just throw it in his mouth real quick. You know, that was, so as a result, I eat produce salt on everything. Eggs, salty bacon, apples, fruits, you know, I eat salt on everything. My mom was bad about it. I think it caused her medical problems. And again, it helps enhance the taste. Yeah. Job is saying here, in essence, the trials that I'm going through, I have no salt set before me. I've just got to eat it like it is. Like it's a punishment. You know, like a punishment. That's it. Yeah. Can he go through the suffering? And he's saying, can I really go through suffering without complaining? No, somebody's got to hear my complaints. Is there any taste in the white of an egg? Well, I've never cooked an egg white just to eat it without salt and pepper. I always eat, say, with salt and pepper with eggs. I can't even begin to imagine it. Egg whites do not have any taste. It's not something you look forward to eating, right? Job is not savoring his trials that he's going through. He's not enjoying what he's going through. He's just having to deal with it. And then he says, my appetite refuses to touch them. They are as food that is loathsome to me.
Mine's a soul.
Huh?
I said, mine's a soul. Soul, my soul. Mine says my soul.
My appetite or soul?
This says my soul.
Okay, you're reading out of the New King James?
Yeah. New King James.
Okay.
Refuses to touch them.
Yeah.
That's a lot more deep, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, you got a good point there.
That's different though, isn't it?
Yeah.
What is your English version?
This is the New King James I've got here. This is my English Standard Version.
Oh, okay.
My appetite refuses to touch them.
That's probably a better translation.
Okay. Now, beginning in verse 8. He really gets down to the nitty-gritty here. And what is he saying here in verse 8? He's saying, you know what? I wish I could have my request. I want God to give me what I'm longing for. That it would please God to crush me. He said, I wish I was dead. Listen, this is what he's saying. I wish God would just take me out of here. And he says that he would loose his hand and cut me off. Then I would still have comfort. And then I would still have comfort. Though in anguish I would exult, he will not spare. I have not concealed the words of the Holy One. So, if what
does he mean? Are you talking about killing him?
He's not talking about killing himself.
I'm saying, no,
but he's saying, I wish God would just go ahead and end my life.
Oh, I was gonna say, like the way it says it, then will loose his hand and cut me off. Sounds like why don't he just cast me out? Like whatever. It's like a bad thing. I'm saying
we often think about that idea of being separated from God, and he's not saying I want to be separated from God. He says I just want to be separated from all these pains that I'm hurting now, that I'm dealing with right now. And again, you probably have, and I have as well, met people that when they're suffering a whole lot, they just, and I've seen this in people's lives. Whenever they get to a certain age and they're just hurting all the time,
ready to die.
They just said, you know what? I don't care. I'm just ready to die. Well, I had a mother-in-law that was that way. And my father was that way. A lot of the way, because he lost my mom. He was living by himself. I try to go up there and help him and take care of him in every way that I can. And but it still wasn't the same. And then again, the last week or so of his life, we were there the whole time. And he was in a hospital. And he just says, in essence, I'm tired, I'm done, I'm finished.
Especially when they can't take care of themselves.
Yeah.
She couldn't take care of herself.
And that's the way it is with a lot of people that can't take care of themselves. And we all will probably get to the point in our lives where somewhere down the line we'll say, you know what, I'm tired, I'm done. I'm ready just to
she
go.
She was a Christian though.
Yeah.
She was like, I'm ready to go.
Yeah. And that's for the child of God. There's where that comfort comes in. So remember, now we're coming back up here. We've read verses 8 through about verse 10. So let's look at these verses very quickly. Remember, Eliphaz said in chapter 4, verses 7 through 11, that he pointed out the wicked man and his end. And he said, he kept telling Job, if you just come back to God, that will not happen. And Job is up to the point now, he says, you know what? I don't care if I do die. I'm ready. Job picks back up and it expresses that ideal again, only with a little more vehement. Huh?
He probably thinks it's inevitable, like you were saying.
Yeah, I think it probably is.
If like all your family members have died, and then now you're struck down with an illness, you might think like, oh, I'm about to die.
Yeah.
I'm about to die.
And you won't care about staying because
you get what do you call it? Like you get used to it.
Well, used to it might be a way, or
that's
you
a
just
bad way to say it, but that's
yeah,
what I mean. But like,
yeah. The ideal is I'm tired of it. I just want to die.
Yeah,
just get over
thinking about
it. Yeah. And so he says in verse 8, oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant to me the thing that I look for. In other words, Eliphaz had said, Job, you're going to die because of your sins. Chapter 4, verse 9, 20, 21, and chapter 5, verse 2. And Job is saying, bring it on.
Yeah.
Let's go. I'm
He
ready.
could have offered a cow, an animal for him, though.
Yeah. He probably, and before it's over with, they will offer sacrifices. So let's remember that. But Job is saying, compared to the existence in this life, suffering what I'm going through with all the sores, death's got to be better. It's not only his desire, but he's actually saying, I just let death come.
Well, what could they have done right then? I mean,
what were they doing before they started having to answer Job? They were keeping their mouths shut and being quiet. And sometimes, this is the thing we've got to say. We want to bring comfort to those that are bereaving and those that are sick.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes they just want you to be there.
They just want you to be there. You don't have to say a word. And sometimes I think we all try to say words that we've heard somebody say before to try to bring some comfort to them. But the reality is it's not going to, because of what they're going through.
Yeah, plus they might not take it the right way.
And that's exactly right. And that's just it. And that's going to be just adding more pain. I was reading a lot and have read a lot about the wrong things to say
in those situations.
In a funeral, for example.
Oh yeah.
Well, God just wanted another angel.
Yeah.
Well, number one,
that's not entirely true.
That's not true. Number two, because we don't become angels whenever we get to heaven. That's just not it.
Well, Paul said we'll be like the angels. He's
We'll
talking
be
about
like
the body. He's talking about the form of the body.
Yeah. But that's silly. I mean, why would God need another angel?
It's like a comforting thing they're trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, your baby's in heaven. Probably just don't even do that. Just say something like maybe, well, the Lord is, our shepherd or something,
Right. And that's where we become like Eliphaz and Bildad and Job's friends, and the fact that we're trying to explain something, we're trying to maybe bring comfort to somebody, only in their case, they're going to charge Job with sin. And that's the reason why he did that. But we try to bring comfort, but sometimes the words that we say bring more hurt.
Well, he probably might see them in heaven. No, I'm saying Job might.
Yeah.
He might see them in heaven.
Yeah. So that's kind of what it boils down to. And he said, I'm ready for it to go. I'm ready. And again, I want you to notice something else here. Job through all of this did not consider taking his own life.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people try to justify suicide.
There's only like one instance in the Bible, right? I only know of Judas. That's the only one I think.
Well, there was Judas Iscariot. I think there was some others in the Old Testament. But I can't remember immediately.
But I'm saying they looked at it. Obviously, it's negative.
Right.
That's not something that they would have approved of.
And again, where did that come from? Obviously, from the very beginning, it was God who gives life.
Yeah.
It is God who has the right to take life.
It's murder.
Yeah.
It's murder.
We're murdering ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is. Aristotle.
It's out of the question.
Yeah. Aristotle said that if you take your own life, that's cowardly. Plato, in his theory, said that it would be what? It would be a sin against God, rebellion against God. So he said it would please God. He said, this is what I long for, that it would please God to crush me. He would loose his hand and cut me off. Let him go ahead and kill me. You've been threatened. You've been stretching out your hand, God, against me in all these ways. So just go ahead and do it, Cut him off. What does it mean to cut him off? In the Hebrew, they talk about a loom, and whenever you're making a rug or something, you cut off these little bits of threads. Yeah. And what in essence Job is saying is, I wish you'd cut me off and liberate me from this world. That's in essence what he's saying. Then he says, then I would have comfort. When? After he's died. Then I will have comfort. And he says, yeah, I will harden myself, or I would, in anguish, I would exalt. He will not spare, for I have not concealed the words of the Holy One. In the other words, he says, I have not done anything like this. Job never thought of suicide. He knew he couldn't do that. So if God did as Job asked, then Job would have comfort. At death, he would have the comfort that he earnestly longs for.
It's a saints.
Yeah.
Holy ones.
Saints. So even at this early stage, again, if this is written during the patriarchal age, maybe by Moses, very possible, there was some sort of an understanding of life after death even then.
Yeah.
And that's what's, that's what's very important as we look at
that
this.
Genesis, right?
Huh?
They don't get into that.
You don't really get that in Genesis. But obviously they got it from somewhere.
Yeah. Moses and
Yeah, well, Moses wrote Genesis. And so it would be later on that understanding of the separation of the soul and the spirit from the body would be what death is.
Wasn't Psalms and all that's written over all those time periods, right?
Yeah.
So they might have had some of the Psalms written down at that time.
Well, we do know for a fact that Moses probably wrote Psalms 90. So he probably would have written that. David wrote a lot of the Psalms. Solomon wrote a lot of them as well. So
Proverbs.
Yeah, he definitely Solomon wrote a lot of the Proverbs. So the thing is that we're trying to get across here is, yeah, they would have had understandings of life after death even then. But would they have had the same understanding that we have? I don't think so, because they didn't have the completed revelation. However, let's think about this a little bit further. Even when we take everything that we could read about of life after death in the New Testament, we still don't know a whole lot.
What are you saying? Even
if we take everything we can read about in the Old Testament and the New Testament together, but I said specifically in the New Testament, we still don't know a whole lot.
About what? Spiritual?
About what's going on after we die. Obviously, somehow or another, our spirit's going to have another body. Whenever you look at Jesus' body after the resurrection, at one time he would tell the ladies, don't touch me. At another time, he would tell Thomas, put your hands into my side and in my hands and feet.
Yeah.
So you have a resurrected body. There's a lot of questions as to exactly what's going on. How does that all work out? And I don't know that we'll know that until the resurrection.
Yeah, I think that people have taken that in a lot of directions.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think the resurrection means that. I don't think it means, I think that Jesus in that instance, it means that, but I think it's simile in a way.
Yeah.
Like you're going to be resurrected. It would not make a lot of sense for him to resurrect a body for us and then take us up to heaven where it's a spiritual realm. I mean, I don't know, but I'm just saying.
And I see what you're saying, but Paul will talk about the fact in 1 Corinthians 15, when he talks about the resurrection,
I know.
he will talk about the ideal of a resurrected body.
But that could be spiritual. It could be spiritual. I know what you're saying.
Okay. So we just have to go from what the scriptures are plainly teaching us in those situations. So in verse 10, what he does now is he says, what? I would have comfort, though in anguish, I would exult. In other words, as I'm actually dying, I would still be happy because I'm out of here. Is death painful? It seems like it depends on how you die in a lot of situations. The thing is that Job was saying, he says, I'm going to, in anguish I would exult, he will not spare, for I have not concealed the words of the Holy One. The Holy One, again, speaking about God. So he's not concealed God's words from himself. He's lived by them. He's let them operate in his life. He told them to others. He was not ashamed of the word of God. And he told the others the same thing. This is what they do. So he says, what strength do I have that I should hope? What is my end that I should prolong my life? So he's now answering some suggestions made by Eliphaz. What strength do I have that I should hope? He refuses to be comforted. He's still going through the pain. All of your arguments that you've made against me, Eliphaz, hasn't really helped me any. And this is what we were talking about a moment ago. Sometimes when we talk to somebody that's lost a loved one, sometimes the things we say are not always that comforting, right?
You might see it that way.
Yeah, we might see it that way, but does the person who hears it see it that way?
That's why you gotta just keep your mouth shut, I guess.
And you know, having worked at funeral homes, seen a lot of grief, preached a lot of funerals, going through some myself.
I still remember some things that people shouldn't have said, including family members.
Yeah,
Mom died.
and that hurts, and it sticks with you. And so one thing I did learn a lot as a helper at a funeral home as well as a preacher is sometimes it's just better to keep your mouth shut.
Mhm.
Tell them what the Bible says and just leave it at that. So he says, in essence, what strength do I have? Again, how can I be strong? I'm already lost everything, and now physically my strength is so low I can't hardly do anything. So you're looking at me, and he says, I should have hope. I'm about as far down as I could go. I don't see any hope. I don't see nothing getting better. I don't see nothing getting any better than the situation. Even though you said, I will have hope in life, that doesn't mean that I have it. Just because you said it doesn't mean I will have it. He will not spare, and I've not concealed the Holy One. So he says, you know what? I'm going to stay with what God says. So he says, what is my strength? What strength do I have that I should hope? I don't have it. What is my end that I should prolong my life? In other words, why am I going through all of this? His strength is brought so low that it is inconceivable that he could be restored. He cannot entertain any such hope at all. What is my end? He can't see anything in this life that's worth living for. Now, as I read some of this, I struggle sometimes with, and this is what we've got to keep in thought, man, too, is he still had a wife.
Well, maybe not.
Well, we read about what happened earlier, but again, we don't read any more about his wife at all.
Sounds like she might have left him.
And that could possibly have been the case too, but we don't know that. We can't make that assumption, right?
Well, I mean, you're not hearing from her right now.
No, you don't hear from her at all. The only word you've heard her say is curse God and die. And that's all she says in the entire book. Okay. That's it. That's it. So, is my strength the strength of stones? Is my flesh bronze? I can't, in essence, am I strong as brass or stones to be able to bear these problems by myself? No, I can't. It would take somebody that is hard as a rock to be able to deal with that. And then he goes on and says what? Verse 13. He says, is my help not within me and its success driven from me? In other words, I want you to know I'm not mad. I'm not insane. I want you to understand that what I'm saying is things that I thought of. He said, it may sound like the ravings of a madman, but I know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, that's it. So he then starts talking to his friends. All righty. He retort upon his friend, beginning in verse 14 and going through the end of the chapter. So what does he start saying? To him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friends, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. You see what Eliphaz said? You have sinned. That's the reason why you're in this mess. And he says, well, listen, he said, if you were in my place and afflicted, he says, you should show kindness. Even though he does forsake the fear of the Almighty, you need to show some compassion here. You need to show some caring and not just automatically think that, I'm just going to write you off because you're a sinner. So that's where he emphasizes here. they have this lack of compassion. Humanity demands, if we have the Spirit of Christ, that we show compassion to those who are hurting.
Love.
Yeah, yeah. And again, we need to be there for people. And think about, again, we've seen this time and time again, and I just challenge us to think about this, is the fact that, Job has sought for their sympathy. Instead, he receives Eliphaz's self-righteous arguments. And in essence, they've not done anything to help him. In fact, if anything, they've just added to his burdens because, oh, that's the way you're looking at me.
Like audacious.
And you only see me as a sinner, not as somebody that is in need of compassion and love. And so there's where he's really struggling with this. And there's where he really struggles. So he goes on and he says, my brothers have dealt deceitfully like a brook, like the streams of the brooks that pass away, which are dark because of the ice and into which the snow vanishes. So the thing that he says here, he says, you're not showing any pity. God pities all men. True or false?
God pities them?
Mm-hmm.
In what sense?
He's created us whenever we're in trials because God loves us. He hates to see that we're in trials.
I don't like the word pity,
maybe
really.
that's not the best word, but we do also know that he obviously had to pity all
Sympathy,
mankind.
maybe? Or empathy?
Perhaps. We are made in his image.
Mm-hmm.
But in another sense, he does emphasize the idea that he pities us in the fact that
what we have to go through.
Yeah, because of sin.
Yeah.
And that's where mercy and grace comes in. And that's the reason why he sent his son.
Well, I don't know though, because I think of like in the sense of God is righteous and it's a little bit different. I know what you're saying. God as mind is beyond comprehension. So I mean, obviously he understands us on a level that we can't understand ourselves.
Right. And I think that's a valid point. And that's a very good point. He doesn't, or he does understand us better than we ever will. Right.
He can't understand why we would go and sin.
Yeah.
I mean, he may understand it, but it's like, why do you keep bumping your head on that same,
Yeah. And you're making a good point there in the fact that, so what happens is he's now comparing them to, and think about the idea now, as you're looking at this, he is a brook. In the desert or in that particular land, there would be certain areas, and I
didn't see that.
You didn't see it?
I went to Kuwait and Iraq.
Okay.
It was really dry, just deserts.
Yeah. But there were times whenever you would have storms, even in desert lands, and these little low places would be just full of water. But then within a day or so, it will all be gone.
Dry up.
Yeah, they dry up. Now, that's kind of what he's trying to draw this to. He says, my brothers, you guys, you who have come to help me, you've dealt deceitfully like a brook. I'm needing water. I'm needing encouragement. I'm needing love and compassion shown to me. And all you've done is you're like a brook that's dried up. You're not giving me what I need. You're not giving me the water, the sustenance that I need.
For sure do that in Africa, which would have been like right there.
Yeah, well, and especially again, even in Israel, they would have had those times. That you go back and read even the New Testament where it talks about the summer rains or the spring rains, and that's where they really got most of their seeds in the ground and was able, and it really all depended upon whether or not they got rain.
Yeah.
And he says, you guys have come to encourage me. And he says, I've already been dried up and now you're just making it even drier for me. Thank you.
And then they have to drink water too, though.
Yeah, that's right. Like the streams of the brook that pass away. They're dark because of ice and which the snow vanishes. When it is warm, they cease to flow. When it's hot, they vanish from their place. Do you hear what he's saying? The water dries up. You're supposed to come here to help me. And he says, their paths of their way turn aside, they go nowhere and perish. So in all of this, what he's saying, he says, in essence, you know, you're cold as ice. We often talk about that idea, the black ice.
Is that with friends like you
Who needs enemies? That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Like snow that is hid. There's no purity. When it's hot, it just dries up. And especially in those lands, if you don't get around certain water at certain times, then
that's a very like poetic way of talking.
Yeah. But that was Hebrew. And that was also the way that they would get across these ideas. So the thing that he's trying to say is, he says, you know, let me explain it this way. A lot of times, lately, because of what's going on in television and all, me and my wife haven't watched a whole lot of regular television.
I haven't watched it in years.
The only thing I'm watching now are old Westerns. Now, picture, if you would, a few moments getting out the plains of Oklahoma or Texas or someplace and literally driving herds of cattle. You would have to have a guy that would go way out in front to tell you where the water is.
Yeah.
Right. Because they would need water, and it can't be just any kind of water, because a lot of water at that time would make them sick, things along that line. And that's kind of as I was reading this, is kind of what I was thinking about.
I was thinking, how did they get around?
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that the other day. Like, I mean, like when I was a teenager, I used to get lost because we didn't have GPS and stuff like that.
Right.
Like if you knew where to go is where you knew where to go.
Right.
But now we've got this technology helps us do everything. It's like they knew where everything was at without landmarks or a map.
Right. Or a map.
They just knew where it was.
Whenever I was growing up, I knew how to learn. I learned how to make a map. You obviously did too. Now you're exactly right. We have GPS on all of our.
But they knew exactly where we were going. I mean, there was no question of that.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus might be a little different, but I mean, because Jesus is different, but I mean, like they just knew, like, oh, okay, we're gonna go up there, and that's where this is.
Exactly right, and they knew and they knew where it was supposed to be.
They might have been
and
there.
Then sometime, yeah, probably somewhere down the line, or they had heard about it, and then when they got there, how disappointed would have they been if everything had dried up?
But they were like, we're here. This is the town.
Yeah.
There wasn't like a question about it. Like, let me go ask somebody.
Yeah, you
like
can't.
how they used to do back in the day.
Yeah.
They used to like, go ask, where's this at? I'm trying to go.
So that's it. So he says, you should be encouraging me. You should be giving me some help, giving me water that I need. That's what I've been needing. But he says, what? You haven't given me anything. And he says, you know what? You have no compassion. Just being honest, you have no compassion. You were supposed to bring me comfort. I got nothing. And if I relied on you, I would die, because you're not giving me anything I need. And so again,
I wonder if they were feeding them though. Were they feeding them and giving him like water and stuff?
they may very well have been, because again, a lot of the stuff that he had was
He
gone.
couldn't move around.
He couldn't move around that much. But then there was also
maybe they gave him an egg with no salt.
Yeah. But then they also think about it in this respect, even if they did that, while they may have fed his body, did they feed his spirit?
Yeah,
No.
I know, I get it at some deeper level.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, like,
Right.
he might be complaining about that too.
And that may very well be the case. And so look again in verse 19, the caravans of Thema, the travelers of Sheba, hope for them. Tema was the Arabian tribe that descended from Ishmael, Genesis 25:15. So again, they would look for caravans would be coming along, and they would always do what? Follow the water.
Were already established.
Yeah.
Ishmael.
Yeah. Yeah. So they were confounded because they had hope. In other words, they thought they knew where a watering hole was, and it's not. That's right. So Job was discouraged because he looked for compassion for his friends. They should have been wiser and know better, but he got nothing. And I think that's a great lesson for all of us as we continue to talk about this idea that whenever you do try to encourage somebody, encourage them.
It was like we were saying, like people were trying to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking about that in some woman's magazine a long time ago. And they were saying the guy, when the woman says, I'm thirsty, and then she wants the guy to be like, I sympathize with your thirst.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Right.
it, like the guy tries to go like, okay, let me get you some water. That's what a man
Right.
think like.
That's what we think. We're going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily.
It was a metaphor. I think.
Yeah, it was. But they don't necessarily want the empathy, or they don't want you to solve the problem. They want you just to listen.
I want you to think like them.
I'm not going to go
I'm
down
just
that
saying,
road.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying though, like
Right.
that's what the kind of what he's saying, right? He's saying like, I want you to empathize with me or whatever.
Yeah.
I like the word empathy better than sympathy.
Yeah.
Sympathy is like,
Just feeling sorry for somebody, not doing
well, I was
anything
in the
about it.
military, so,
Yeah.
you know, that's what they
Yeah.
don't do sympathy.
Yeah. Right. Right. So he says, you know, that's what I've looked for. What did I get? Nothing.
Nothing.
So we come to verse 22. Did I ever say, bring something to me, or offer a bribe for me from your wealth, or deliver me from the enemy's hands, or redeem me from the hand of the oppressors? Job says, listen, I didn't ask you guys to come, but you came. Did I ask you to bring something for me? No.
But
He
you
didn't
still
ask for
didn't
that.
bring something.
They just brought themselves, right? So as you're looking at it, it seems like, no, they didn't do that, you know. Did I ask you to give me a reward for something out of your substance? No, you hadn't. You know, it's not like he'd been begging, and it would have been upsetting to him if they had turned away from him. But again, he hadn't worn out their patience by asking something from them. In other words, he's not even asking them to make a sacrifice that much. He didn't ask for all of that. He didn't ask them to deliver him from the hands of the enemy, or from the hands of the Chaldeans or the Sabaeans or anything. He didn't ask for them to go and get up an army to defeat the Chaldeans and Sabaeans and bring all his stuff back. You remember back in chapters 1 and 2 where
they might not won.
Huh?
They might not have won. Though.
May not have, but the bottom line is he didn't ask for all that. He asked nothing from them.
Yeah.
They came voluntarily, and when they did so, he expected their pity, and he got blamed.
Yeah.
It's all your fault. You must have sinned. You need to repent.
I got some family members like that.
Yeah. And that's, well, you know, as you said before, we have family members like that. We have church members like that. And I think there's a great lesson here for the church in the fact that, you know, God expects us to help the poor.
Yeah.
Bottom line. So, did I ask for all?
Like you said, agape, huh?
Huh? Yeah,
Agape.
the agape love. That's right. So we go a little further. Teach me and I'll hold my tongue. So, okay, you're here. You're asking, you know, I didn't ask for all of this, but he says, you teach me. You teach me. You tell me what I've done wrong. I'm willing to be taught. What did I do wrong with my life? I don't want any more innuendos or insinuations. You know, be blunt, be forceful. Tell me what I've done wrong.
He's calling them out.
Yeah, that's it. That's what it boils down to. Teach me how I've erred. We've got to realize that, again, when we're teaching people the gospel, we've got to tell them the bad news before we tell them the good news. They've got to know that they're sinners lost in the sight of God, and they need to come to God. So there's always that emphasis there that we need to make sure of that. And so we need to do it, but it need to be done in love, speaking the truth in love, right? So that needs to happen. But again, I haven't read a lot of wonderful, loving words here. And before this whole thing gets over with in the book of Job, it gets worse. It gets much worse because they try to come up with some sort of sin that he's committed. They will list off a bunch of sins that they think he might have possibly committed somewhere down the line. And so that's it. And so he says, he goes on and says this, how forceful are right words. I appreciate you telling me the truth. I appreciate you giving me what I need to know. But what does your arguing prove? You've not proven anything to me. You've not said anything that's helping me in this situation. If anything, you're hurting me that much more. And so he says, do you intend to rebuke my words? Or in the speeches of a desperate one, which is when? In essence, I'm desperate. I'm struggling. So he's really getting tough now. He says, is it your intention to reprove my words and not my conduct? You've got nothing on me in my conduct. And now you're trying to catch me in my words. You know, if we want to find something against somebody, we can find it pretty quick, can't we? Either by their actions or by their words, by what
Maybe
they
they
say.
have a bad outlook on it. Like I was saying about my family members, like sometimes I stopped talking to them, but they just like assume that I did the worst.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, like, you don't even really know me, do you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's maybe like what he's going through.
Yeah.
Like, you don't really know that well.
That's exactly what's going on there. That's exactly what he's saying. You don't know me that well.
They're assuming the worst.
They're assuming the very worst. And that's the sad tragedy of it all. So he says, you know, one thing I've got to say about Job here, he said, I'm willing to be instructed. Tell me what I've done wrong.
Yeah. He's trying to call him out.
Yeah. Tell me what I've done wrong, you know? But he said, if you can't do that, it's like speaking to the wind. Nobody's going to hear you when the wind's blowing real hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the wind has been blowing me real hard. And I've gone through a lot of struggles and I'm going through a lot of difficulties. And I'm really, really struggling with a lot of stuff right now. And all you're giving me is a bunch of empty words.
It seems like it would have been better to just talk about random topics or something.
Yeah.
Like, you know, so-and-so. Like,
and in the end, another point is, as we've talked about before, it would have been better if they'd have just kept their mouth shut.
Yeah, but what I mean is, like,
Yeah.
rather than to go at him like that, maybe just like make him feel comfortable.
That's right. So he says, goes on in verse 27, you've overwhelmed the fatherless and you undermine your friend. You've overwhelmed the fatherless. You've taken advantage of me. I'm weak. I'm helpless. I can't do anything. He feels like a fatherless child.
Is his house still there? His house wasn't destroyed, right?
Not as far. We do know that his son's house was, but we don't think his house was.
Okay.
So think about this in this respect. He said, you know, it feels like a fatherless child. And they are so cruel that they pretend to be kind to him, but they're lying in wait for him, trying to ensnare him in his talk. Rather than feeling what he has felt, they try to trip him up, reprove his words, and in essence, blame him for all that he's going through.
They're taking a high and mighty.
Yeah, the high and mighty way of looking at it. And that's, and as I was typing notes, years ago, I put in this with friends like these who need enemies, you know.
High and mighty, like you, like,
yeah,
like what they used to say, on your high horse or something.
Yeah.
You know, like Paul says, you're like all puffed up. You think, oh, you're so righteous, and looking down on everyone else.
Yeah.
Kind of.
And this is not something that we are not aware of. We've met some of those people that act like they've got it all figured out.
It's easy to do that as a Christian, though. You
Yes.
gotta be like humble. You gotta remind yourself to be humble.
Right. It is easy to judge people, especially in their sins. But the whole purpose is not to leave them in their sins, but to give them to the one that can save them from their sins.
No, but I just mean being humble.
Yeah.
So you gotta be, it's important. You gotta remember it.
That's right. That's right. So he says, you know, coming back to the context, Verse 28. Look at me. I would never lie to your face. I would never lie to you. And true or false, most of the time, a lot of times, whenever we're looking at people face to face, we can tell whether they're lying or not. Right? So he said, look at me. I would never lie to your face.
Some people.
Yield now. Yes, some people can lie and keep a straight face. Okay, we're not going to argue that either. But and said, so here it is. Yield. Let there be no injustice. Concede that my righteousness still stands. In other words, look at me. And he says, as you look at my life, you will see how righteous I am. Look at me in the face. Tell me if I've lied. Tell me what I've done wrong. I will repent, but you can't do it. Now, as I said before it's over with, they will start coming up with something to say to him. Okay.
Seems to me though that's kind of between him and God though.
That's right.
I mean, like going and telling, I don't know. I mean, like, but I mean, like in this situation, it's definitely like that's really not your business.
That's right. That's exactly the point.
You know what I'm saying? And if he does have something he's done on the side, on the sly, like then God's the only one that's gonna know about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know
That's
what I'm
right.
saying?
That's right. And that's, again, think about the idea. How far do you confess a private sin? Just between the people that's involved in it and God. That's it.
Yeah.
So he now comes to it and he says, my righteousness still stands. He said, is there injustice on my tongue? He says, cannot my taste discern the unsavory? So the thing is, there's no injustice done me. You don't give me an unrighteous sentence. If you honestly consider the case, you must admit that I'm righteous and honest, and you don't have an answer as to why I'm going through this. And he even justifies his words. Is there injustice on my tongue? Even if they're rash, he did not curse God. He did not speak words of blasphemy. He says, if I have spoken words that were sinful, would I have not known it? Should I be going through all of this here? So again, the only thing that they can look at is the actions. Okay. All right. So we'll take a pause and okay, we're going to pick back up again. We're going to finish up chapter 6. He says, we're getting down to verse 29, 30, something like that. Yeah. He said, let there be no injustice. Yes, concede. My righteousness still stands. Is there injustice on my tongue? Cannot my taste discern the unsavory? And so in all of this, he keeps saying to them, I've not done anything wrong. And so you have to find, I've not said anything wrong. So if you're going to find anything about me, you've got to point to some action I've done. They can't do that either. So this is where he stops. Now, in chapter 7, it seems, and again, I just challenge you to think about this, though he is still talking to his friends, it seems like the shift is mainly to talking to God. So let's listen to what he has to say to God here. And as we start thinking about this, think about the idea that he complains of the constant aggravation and the trials he was in. Remember always, whenever you're reading the Bible, that the chapters and the verses were put there by man later.
The numbers too.
Yeah, so as to help us to find a passage of scripture. This was not broken up like it was then.
Oh, yeah.
And so it helps us to find what we're looking for, but we lose. I know this for a fact in my own life, maybe it's yours too, but when I come to a chapter break or a verse break, then my mind seemingly automatically shifts gears a little bit, trying to come up with something. And
sometimes I don't think that they're even right.
I don't think so.
I don't know why they put chapters
and verses and all.
No, I mean, sometimes they do it really terribly.
Yes, they do.
Like they're trying to make you go in a certain direction that was not meant to go.
And that's something you've got to be aware of. You've also got to remember this idea that the Hebrew, as well as the Greek, they didn't have a lot of writing material. They didn't go down to a big box store like Staples or something like that and buy a bunch of paper and start writing this stuff out.
Well, they had to copy it.
They did have to
From-
copy it by
from
hand.
One copy to another.
Yeah.
They did find copies that we have like from the second something century.
Yeah, second century AD and so forth. Another thing that we've got to take consideration is much of that material back at that time would have cost a lot of money. If they wrote it on animal skins,
Did the Greeks write on that too?
papyrus, whatever it calls. Yeah, everybody wrote on this somehow, some way or another. So if they wrote it on papyrus, if they wrote it on animal skins, it would cost a lot of money. So literally, while we think about a run-on sentence being just going on and on and on and on and on, they wouldn't have absolutely no breaks between words. You would just have to know, and you would be able to learn this, but you would just have to know where the word break comes in.
Well, you know, a good example, like it's like when Jesus is talking about reading the Isaiah in the temple.
Right.
It shows that's kind of like probably how they did it.
Right.
That's probably about how they did it.
And a lot of the people at that time, because they couldn't go down to a library, because they couldn't afford books, they would memorize. And they would memorize much, much better than we would, in that they didn't have a bunch of other stuff distracting us all the time or causing us to fill our brains with stuff that doesn't really matter. Right? As an example, again, if you get on the internet or something like that, you can chase a rabbit all over the place from one ad to the other, and by that time you've lost your train of thought. You just got to start all over
Well,
again.
what about the automatic text?
Yeah.
You ever get that? And then that sounds good.
Yeah.
Let's hit that.
Yeah. So you see the point. They didn't have that as we have it today. So let's look at some of the things he starts complaining about. Verses 1-5. Is there not a time of hard service for man on earth? Are not his days also like the days of a hired man, like a servant who earnestly desires the shade, and like a hired man who eagerly looks for his wages? I've been allotted months of futility. Now notice, months. We don't know how long Job suffered like this.
Futility was in what, as in,
Futility would be
I forget what that is. Futile.
futile is, allotted months of futility. I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. Things aren't getting any better. It's just the way it always has been, since this started.
Wow.
And he says, wearisome nights have been appointed to me. I can't even sleep. Think again how that's ravaging the body. Besides the sores, he's hurting so bad he can't sleep. Wearisome nights. He can't close. He says, when I lie down, I say, when shall I arise and the night be ended? He said, I have my fill of tossing till dawn. And he says, my flesh is caked with worms and dust, and my skin is cracked and breaks out afresh. So this is a lot of the pain that he was going through, the aggravation, the trials that he was going in. Think about the idea of, he says, is there not a time of hard service on the earth? Again, the English or the King James Version will put, is there not an appointed time to man upon the earth? Are not his days like the days of a hireling? In other words, the idea is that I'm suffering a lot. I'm going through a warfare right now. Literally, he's going through warfare. That could very well be what he's talking about. We have a certain work to do, certainly at the time to do it in. Every man must die shortly. I remember whenever I was a child, 3 or 4 or 5 years old, somebody tell me they were 60. That would just forever blow my mind. 60 years old.
Sounds really old.
Yeah.
Sounds old to me. Man.
Sounds old. Yeah.
I mean, I'm almost 40.
Well, I'm 61 now.
Oh, you're 61.
And to make a long story short, 60 ain't that old. As I look back over my life, it's not that old. But I'm a whole lot closer to dying than I was at the age of 5.
Yeah.
You see? And I think that's something to meditate on.
How old do you think he is?
We don't know. If he was living there in the patriarchal times.
Well, he's got kids that are grown.
Yeah, kids that are grown. We can, and again, you're looking at 10 kids. So
they were probably about in their 20s at least, or 30s.
Yeah. So he would have been pushing at least in the 60s or 70s by this time, probably.
And so those guys were his elders. They're really old.
They are older. Yeah.
They're old.
Yeah. And again, if you look at the patriarchal age
They
before the
lived
flood, now there's
130.
a big question. You know,
He says God says my spirit is not going to
always strive with man. But before the flood, they would live up to 969 years in the case of Methuselah. But afterwards, it seems like 60, 70 years. And in fact, the psalmist would say, but I can't remember where exactly he says it. Three score and 10, or perhaps 4 years.
Some people find that hard to believe. They're not Christians, and they're like, "How could someone live like that?" But I mean, you've gotten to where you think in this small box, and you don't know anything outside of your box.
That's right.
Like,
so that's what we're talking about here. So this is here. Here he is. He says, "I've lived a hard life," and it says, "You know what? Are not my days like the days of a hireling?" Think about a hireling at that time was a man that would be hired for one job, long job, and then he would get off finally when he got the job done. He does a certain thing in a certain time. Think about it in this respect. We're all here on the earth for a certain time. And those of us that are Christians, our job is to do what God wants us and expects us to do. And that's the reason why we're here. We can't be with God just yet. God also knows our appointed time. Now that's a interesting thought, for lack of a better term, in the fact that God knows the moment I'm going to die and when and how, and I don't. And perhaps, no, not perhaps.
I like to think about that when I think about all these people freaking out about coronavirus. You're not gonna, if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. There's nothing you can do about it.
That's true. And again, as the coronavirus, if that was going to take you, that was going to be it. But the thing that thinks about is if we knew what our allotted time was, as we got closer and closer and closer, we would probably grow.
Some people like that though. Some people find peace in that. I don't want that.
Yeah.
I don't want to be like, well, I got cancer and I know I'm not going to live but a year. I don't really want to look towards that specific day. Like I know this, whether or not they know or not. You know what I mean? But like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It seems like it's a lot more intimidating or whatever when you have to look towards it like that.
That's right.
Like we don't know. It's a good thing. It's a lot better of a thing, don't you think?
To not know?
Yeah.
I agree. Because if we were thinking about the time, then we'd be worried about that, not taking care of everything else we need to take care of.
But I mean, he might very well think that that's going to happen. If all of this stuff started severely happening to you, you might just think like, wow, this is, you might even think this is the end. Yeah. But nowadays, especially, like, this is the end of the world.
That's right. And a lot of people felt that way over the last couple of years. Yeah. He goes on, he says, you know, like a servant who earnestly desires the shade, you know, if you're working hard all day long and you're looking forward to night, just where you can get some rest, right? Mm-hmm. That's what he's talking about here. You know, we've got work to do. But we've just got to remember that we are hirelings, as it was. So think about it in that respect. You know, the servant waits for the night. Slavery back in those days was awful. You know, hard labor from sun up till sundown, out in the fields. Slaves, no doubt, would earnestly hope for and pray for the night. At least it would give them a little while to rest, right? Then they'd get up the next day and go through the same thing all over again. The hireling would work for money for a certain period of time. And then after they worked hard all day, they sought the money. So what's the point of all this? Job's saying, I've been through this. I just want to die. I'm done. I want to die. So he said, I'm made to, he says, I've been allotted months of futility. The idea is vanity. My days are useless. I can't do anything. I'm sick. It's a burden to him. Wake up with a fever all the time because of those sores. Again, so he's looking to the future and he says, you know, wearisome, not only has he gone through wearisome nights, but all he has to look forward to are more wearisome nights, not being able to sleep, not being able to rest. And so he says, what, when I lay down, I say, when shall I arise? I got to get up. I'm ready to get up. I can't get any, tossing and turning in the bed. If this disease was elephantiasis, as I've talked about before, it was miserable. It would be a heat pervading the surface, prickling, burning heat. And again, so you're feeling hot, and that just gives you restlessness. And then after a period of time, your body needs the rest so much that it'll go to sleep. But then what will you do?
I was thinking pain.
Well, pain too
is one thing that maybe makes it hard to sleep.
Pain, and then if you do sleep, because of the fever, you'd be dreaming some of those weird dreams again that would just drive you absolute. So you couldn't get any rest. You would immediately wake up.
Like the fever induces it or something?
Yeah, fever-induced dreams. Yeah, because it's also affecting the brain too.
Yeah.
Right. So in all of this, he's just like, he's saying, Dr. Erasmus Wilson, Dictionary of Medicine, talking about this particular disease, says that, look, he says, there are deep-seated burning pains, sometimes of a bone or a joint, sometimes in your back. And these pains are greatest at night and give rise to restlessness and frightful dreams. So this is what he possibly was going through. So what did he say? When I lie down, I said, when shall I arise? And the night be ended. I have had my fill of tossing till dawn. And then worms. This kind of just freaks us out a little bit. My flesh is caked with worms and dust. Again, this elephantiasis is we're talking
literally?
about.
You think it means literally?
Well, as I was about to say.
Oh, you're talking about something else.
This elephantiasis, which may have been what he had. Again, we can't say for a fact that he did, is actually a worm that gets in the skin and causes the sores. It's
Like
kind of like,
maggots?
no, not like a maggot, as much as it's a long thread-like creature. In other words, it's kind of like a thread, but it don't ever get fat like a maggot does.
Yeah.
And it's going from place to place in your body. And then whenever.
Is that microscopic?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So there is a disease called this, and it is a microscopic disease, and it's again worms. So not only that, but if you had this worm going from one part of the body to the other, and then creating a sore, then you would have the flies come to it. You'd have to, especially if you couldn't keep the pus out. I know we're talking about things that are pretty gross in our minds, but it emphasizes what we're talking about here. And then again, this is, I was reading through this a little bit. Here's some of my notes. A common feature in this disease is the growth of tubercles under the skin. These enlarge, and as time goes on, they soften, break open, and ulcers form, and it oozes out a loathsome discharge.
Did you think they had doctors back then?
I think obviously they don't have them the way we have them today, where they would be able to do it. But yeah, they had certain men that were able to know what particular thing could help at that time. Think about, again, going back to some of the Westerns, before penicillin and stuff like that, they grew and they knew that certain.
That was like a death sentence with a doctor.
Because
he would go do give you some snake oil or something,
and it could kill you.
Mercury in it.
But then you would have also something that you had a doctor that was trying to do what was right. Think about a lot of the, again, thinking about that idea, think about how a lot of the Indians would know some of these plants that would work under certain circumstances.
Well, you said that Luke was a doctor.
Well, Luke was a doctor. So again, that stresses all of that. All right. So what's he saying? He said, my flesh is caked with worms and dust. And so now beginning in verse 6 and 7, somewhere around these days, he says, my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle, and they're without hope. Now, some people think the beginning in verse 7. Now, in my Bible, and yours does too, I see, It goes through verses 1 through 5 and then takes a break, and it picks back up with 6 through 10.
Not really much of a break, but
Not much, yeah.
I see what you're saying. You're trying to dent it.
Yeah.
They do that a lot, though.
Yeah, and they're trying to, because, and again, remember when they wrote it, they didn't do this, but we do it today because the people that translate it think this is the beginning of another thought. And so they would stop a sentence or they would start a paragraph.
Yeah.
Okay, as we would understand it. Because whenever we read something, we read in paragraphs, right?
Yeah.
You look for one thought in the paragraph. That's something we've always been trained to do.
It's an idea to help you. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes they do stuff that kind of trips you up, but
Yeah.
the idea is like, it would be hard if this Job was just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 110. You know what I mean? Just kept going, and it would be maybe hard for you to digest it.
Right.
You'd be like, which one are we on? 95. We're on 95.
Hey, everybody go to page 95, third paragraph.
Yeah.
You know, so
It
that's
would be hard. It would be hard.
Yeah, it would be hard, and that's the reason why they've done it.
It's not, but don't. Yeah.
So some people do look at verses 1 through 6 all being together as a paragraph.
Mhm.
In my Bible, it breaks at verse 5 and goes to verse 6. I think it should break at verse 6 and then go on to verse 7. And most people do believe, again, a lot of the commentators and so forth believe that now he is talking no longer to his friends as much as he addresses his speech to God.
Yeah.
So notice what he says. He says, he told his friends, the last thing, my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. I have no hope. And then in verse 7, it seems like he's talking to God. And what he's going to do in this last section of chapter 7 is talk about how bitter his life is, how he wishes he could die. Okay. Remember, my life is a breath. My eye will never again see good. He's given up hope. The eye of him who sees me will see me no more. My friends, my wife, you, while your eyes are upon me, I shall no longer be. As the cloud disappears and vanishes away, so he who goes down to the grave does not come up. He shall never return to his house, nor shall his place know him anymore. Now let's spend a little bit of time talking about some of the things he says here. Number one, if this is true, that he is actually beginning to talk to God here, then look at some of the things he says. And you also, as you're listening to him, a lot of times if we take these verses out of context, which is a very, very real danger sometimes in chapters and verses, if we take it out of context, we can make the Bible say some things that it does not teach.
I feel like it's a lot of like kind of like Proverbs. I know you're saying it was like Hebrew, what you call it? What did you call that again? Like poetry? Okay, poetry.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's like each line is a thought.
Right. And so much like a proverb. So if he's praying to God, he will say to him, in essence, remember that my life is wind, the King James Version says. So, he perhaps he's looked at his friends and his friends are just kind of rolling their eyes like, I don't want to hear no more. And the thing that I do like about this is the fact that God's still listening to him.
Mm-hmm. No, don't think God's always listening.
Yeah. God knows, and God still listens. So even when nobody else will listen, God will. And that should bring comfort to all of us, right? I mean, seriously. He represents himself to God as a dying man and has no hope. And he says, you know what? My days are, and again, the King James says, remember that my life is wind. Wind is unstable, right? 1 minute it blows one way and the next minute it blows another way, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the way it is. It's vain, it's shifting, it's ready to pass away. There's a lot of passages here that emphasize that. Job 8, verse 9.
But he says
but
the wind, though, I mean, I know it's wind, but it says that the breath of God is what life is.
Right.
His breath was what he put into Adam, right?
Right. That's right. So he really does not have all the hope that Eliphaz even brought out to him. Eliphaz says, you know what, if you just repent, then God will put you back where you were. And Job is saying, no, while your eyes are upon me, I shall no longer be. The eye of him who sees me will see me no more. So again, as we're looking at this whole phrase, we've got to understand that he's speaking of this life only, not of another. He doesn't have the hopes that Eliphaz is trying to bring out that he will be able to live. You know, we are all going to leave this world one day, but we have the hope of something beyond this world. And so he says, the eye of him that hath seen me shall see me no more. Verse 8, while your eyes are upon me, I will no longer be. So he's still talking. He's not talking about what was his concept of heaven. Does that even come into play here? I don't think so. I think he's just saying, once I'm dead, and you will never see me no more. So he says, after all men are dead, then they shall see those men no more upon the earth. Where do they go? Where am I now? Yeah, so he who goes down to the grave does not come up. I don't think he's dismissing the afterlife. I think he's just talking about from a purely physical viewpoint here on this earth. Once you bury somebody, you don't see them again. Period. Unless you dig up the body, and who would want to do that? You know what I'm trying to say? So that would be it. So once we get there, there'll be no more returning. So, you know, one of the things that I pointed out when I was teaching this before, you know, listen, while we do believe in an afterlife, while we believe in a heaven, let us use what God gives us now while we're in this world. Let's love others like we're supposed to love others while we're here, because once we're dead, we can't show that love anymore.
Well, I mean, you gotta think about that. Everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not talking about just love. You gotta think about decisions you make.
That's right.
All that stuff.
So we need to show our love now. I won't be able to tell my wife once I'm gone, if she's the one that outlives me. I won't be able to tell her I love her anymore. So I'll tell her 5 or 6 times every day.
Oh yeah,
you know, and that's the same thing. I think one of the other things I point out here in the lesson, in my notes here, and it's something to think about. None of us know when our last day will be. So we've got to live every day expressing these thoughts, showing that love.
You're not talking about YOLO, are you?
Huh?
You're not talking about YOLO.
No.
You know, you only live once. You heard those people.
No, because we know I'm not. I just got finished saying we're taking that out of the picture. We're taking out, you know, while we are here on this earth.
Yeah, you got to do the right thing.
We've got to do the right thing. We've got to be the right kind of people. And because we don't know when that day is going to be coming to an end, we need to take every opportunity we can to make sure we're doing it right.
Yeah.
And I think there's a great lesson there for all of us in that respect. So he said, my life is a breath. My eye will never again see good. The eye of him who sees me will see me no more. While your eyes are upon me, I shall no longer be. I shall be as a cloud that disappears and vanishes away. Again, James uses that idea, right? Our life is as a vapor that appears for a little time and vanishes away. He who goes to the grave does not come up, not in this life, but he will in the next life. He will never return to his house, nor shall his place know him anymore. He's just talking about all the things that's going on. Once a man is dead, he's not going to go back home. He's not going to enjoy it anymore. He will not have to worry about the cares, the toils of this world anymore. That's it. That's it. So, look in verse 11. Now, I will not restrain my mouth. He said, I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. While I'm here, I'm going to stream on ahead. He says, I will speak in the anguish, a strong emotional thing. The idea, I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain. Okay. Verse 11, the idea of 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 10 also brings out that idea. You know, when his friends turned a deaf ear, God still listens. God doesn't want us to complain. He often emphasizes that. He gets murmuring and complaining, but God also understands that we're men.
Mm.
And God understands that sometimes we will break out in complaints because because things aren't going our way, because things are not the way we had thought they ought to be. And again, that's our weakness in the fact that we're not so wrapped up in God's will.
Don't you think though, you kind of like, you express it to God and then kind of like be patient and wait for God to
And should, yeah, but
wait for God to deal with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes God, I think sometimes God does it on purpose. Like sometimes he's like stands back about it.
True.
Especially with some.
And I think that is the case. And I think that's a very valid point in the fact that he does stand. That's what he's doing here with Job, right?
Yeah.
He's let Job go through this and he stands back. Okay, see how he's going to act.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, the whole purpose was it because Satan had prodded God, not that God needed to be prodded, don't misunderstand me, but had caused God to allow this to happen. So God does that sometimes to see what we're made of, but it also does what?
Yeah, but I think that in the sense of like this, well, obviously God knew Job well enough, but at the same time, like there's a matter of choices, and it's obvious that the whole time there's always been a choice, and it's not a matter of like, okay, well, he put the tree in the Garden of Eden because he wanted him to sin, but he gave them a choice either way, and it seems that our lives are based on choices,
Right.
so.
And that's the other point that I was trying to bring out. Sometimes life is easy and the choices are easy to make.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're going through hard times, the choices are harder to make.
But it's when you get in the word.
That's right. It isn't when you get in the word.
I look to the word and tell me what to do.
That's right. But again, a lot of folks don't, even a lot of people, Christians don't. And they think God's punishing them for some reason or another. Isn't that what his friends are thinking? God's punishing you because you've done something wrong? Yeah. So Job is saying, no, that's not the case. The whole thing that I'm trying to say in all of this is the fact that, you know, I'm not going to restrain my mouth. I'm going to say what needs to be said. I'm going to complain in the bitterness of my soul. I'm going to be able to do that. And so he's saying, and mainly, as I said earlier, he's mainly talking to God here. He's talking to God. When friends turn to deaf ear, God always listens. I love that part. And Tommy a lot of times waits to bring a problem to God. Why don't you bring it to him now? Whatever your problem is. To God and his friends, Job justifies his complaint. I'm better than the animals. I will not be quiet in my complaints about what I've gone through. I will speak in my pain and anguish. And again, I'm going to share what exactly I'm feeling. Sometimes just to share what we're feeling is enough to give us some comfort, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even though he's about to die, or so he thinks he is, as far as he's concerned, it gives him all the rights in the world to complain. So you notice going on in verse 12, he said, am I a sea or a sea serpent that you set guard over me? Again, Lord, you've constrained me. You put liberty, you've taken away my liberty. Am I like a sea that sometimes overflows its banks in a storm that needs to be restrained?
Ironic that he knows that they know about sea serpents back then. I mean, I'm just saying, like, people are always saying the Bible's not true, whatever else, but they knew about a lot of stuff back in those days.
That's right.
Like they knew what was in the ocean.
Yeah, they sure did. That's right. He says, am I a whale or a sea monster. Again, Job feels restrained by these trials. He asks, am I so dangerous that my liberty has to be taken away from me?
Where's the sea monster?
Well, sea serpent, verse 12.
Oh, sea serpent.
Sea serpent, some of the King James Version 1611 translates sea monster. Okay, not a serpent so much.
Not behemoth.
Yeah.
Not that one, right? Okay.
No.
That's something different.
Yeah.
That's in there somewhere.
Yeah. Then look in verse 13. He said, when I say my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions. That's what I was talking about earlier. You know, he getting a little rest. He's hurting. He gets a little bit of sleep, a little bit of rest from the fatigue and the pain. He wants to be able to get some rest and he can't. So he's physically in pain. He's emotionally drained. He's hopeless about the future. I mean, you can't get much more miserable than Job is right now.
Sounds a lot like the Black Plague, actually.
Yeah, it could be. It could be.
I'm saying the Black Plague, they claimed to have done that. And they did some really crazy artwork. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember seeing and looking and reading where they would wear a mask to supposedly scare off the demons that were causing the plague, you know. He accuses God again of scaring him with visions. And again,
is that the devil? I mean, is it the devil or is it the illness?
I think it's the illness mainly, but again, it could be Satan using that, right? Could be using that.
I mean, Satan does give people visions sometimes.
Right. And so as you meditate upon it for a few minutes, think about the idea that, again, Satan was allowed to try and tempt Job. So maybe he's tempting Job in this way as well. So
he's saying it like, well, it's like he's having some sort of like freak out or something.
Yeah. So notice what he says here. You scare me with dreams. My soul chooses strangling and death rather than my body. So what's he saying now? He's saying, I wish I could die. I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Again, let's take that from the context. I don't want to live this life here forever the way I'm going through things right now. Let me alone, for my days are but a breath. My days are just futile. So he's saying, I just want it, you know. I just want to be released. I can't get rest. So please just let me die and let that be it. So God, he's really struggling with this. He's really struggling with why God is allowing him to do that. He said, I loathe it. Let me alone. Just leave me alone. Let me die. Okay. So then in verse 17 through 21, and this is where we're going to stop. Okay. He then starts talking about what is man, talking to God, that you should exalt him, that you should set your heart on him, that you should visit him every morning and test him every moment. So notice what he's saying in verse 17 and 18. Why do you make so much of man? A lot of the Greeks did not consider that God or their gods, they thought that their gods were so great that they did not even pay attention to man. What is Job saying about it here? Why are you being so concerned about me?
Who? God?
Yeah. What is man that you should exalt him, that you should set your heart on him, that you should visit him every morning? Why do you even think about us, God?
Oh, no, it sounds like dangerous speech to me.
It is dangerous speech in that what? But you got to remember why. He's suffering with temperature and he's saying things that he really doesn't, that he would not have said before. Okay. So whenever we're doing this, let's cut him a little bit of slack and understand that in that respect. When we read the Bible, the whole Bible, it's the story of how God does care.
Yeah.
Right.
I know. I'm just saying, like, I can't sympathize. I can't put myself in that place.
Right.
I can't see that.
right?
I mean, hindsight's 2020, but
That's right. And we're not suffering what Job's suffering, right? So we're not in pain. We've not lost our family. We've not gone through everything that he's gone through. We're not suffering feverish chills and dreams that are probably driving us crazy on
I'm
top
not
of
looking
everything else.
down on him. I'm just
Yeah.
necessarily saying, like, I just can't see doing that. I just can't see, like, could you imagine, like, coming at God in a very aggressive manner in prayer? I mean, could you do that? Could you imagine that? I couldn't imagine that.
Well,
I mean, I can imagine expressing frustration or hurt or pain,
yeah,
but one thing I can't do, I just can't see doing is challenging God on some sort of level. It's kind of,
which see Job does here, doesn't he?
well, I mean, it says Job's a righteous man.
Yeah,
And I mean, I know, like, that's a different, and plus it's a different time period, and there's a lot of different ways to look at it. I don't
right.
know.
Think about it this way. Is Job learning more about God here? Yes, he is.
Obviously, he has a relationship with him.
Obviously, he has a relationship with him. Obviously, he has a good enough relationship with him that he's telling God exactly how he feels.
Mhm.
And God is what? He's letting him vent.
Yeah.
He's not striking him dead.
But we're supposed to say, if it's your will,
That's right.
let
That's
it, let
right.
your will be done.
That's right.
So whatever your will is, even if it's not in my favor.
Mm-hmm. But again, did he grasp that point?
No, but I mean, that's
Yeah.
3,000 years, 100,000 years later.
Well, yeah. That's during the time of Christ. We all should be saying that. We should get to that point, right? So he listen. He goes on and he says, "How long, Lord? How much longer am I going to have to deal with this? How much longer am I going to have to deal with this?" Now, some people consider this as an attack on God's majesty,
Yeah.
but really, it is, in a sense, in another way, it's making God more glorious, right? What is it that your greatness and majesty condescend to even notice me?
Mhm.
Why would God ever want to make a covenant with man?
Is that what he's talking about?
No, but it's just kind of taken out of taking it out. Why would God even want a relationship with man?
Because he created him.
That'd be the only reason.
I mean, because we're like, why does a man want a dog?
True.
It's a that's what someone was saying. Like, it's like you shouting at God is kind of like an ant shouting at a human.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make a lot of sense.
It doesn't. It doesn't. But God can, God again handling that. Why did you set your heart on man? Why did you set your heart on man?
Wouldn't you think I mean, wouldn't that maybe go through your mind that you're thinking, like, maybe he's trying to teach you something?
Yeah. God is trying to teach you something.
Sometimes I think
And through all of this, I think he's trying to teach something. And think about this in this respect. When he asked the question, why did you set your heart on man? What is he showing? He's showing God, you still care about man. You have a deep love for man.
Don't they say, like, whatever doesn't kill you, make you stronger?
Yeah, that's
You know what I
right.
mean?
God is with us in his mercies and also in his chastisements.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, how long will you look away from me and let me alone till I swallow my spit? Okay. So what he's saying here in essence is, God, give me a brief respite. You're doing this to me. Just turn your eyes away from me. At least let me have a long enough time to swallow my spit. Now, how long does it take to swallow spit?
Not very long. You don't really think about it.
Yeah, we don't even think about it, right? He said, give me a second of relief. A second. Whatever that, a second of relief.
Well, I was thinking too, though, if this is, I don't know, we're guessing by even trying to figure out what the disease is.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's like, he's like in a lot of pain or whatever else, maybe even swallowing your spit is like a big deal.
It
Like
could hurt.
Like if your whole body is hurting, then like breathing is probably hurting.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, sleeping, bleeding.
That's right. So, but again, let me alone till I swallow my spit. Give me that one little moment of break.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it.
Break from the pain.
Yeah, that's right. just one minute. So then 20 and 21, have I sinned? The King James says, I have sinned. What shall you do unto me, O thou preserver of men?
Is that
He's not
wrong?
talking to, it's not talking to his friends. He's talking to God.
Wait, what? Say that again. What you said?
The King James version says, I have sinned. What shall I do unto thee, O thou preserver of men? In other words, why have you set a mark against thee so that I am a burden to myself? And why dost thou not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now shall I sleep in the dust, and thou shalt seek me in the morning, but I shall not be. So what is he saying here?
Oh, it's a question.
Yeah. Have I sinned, God? What have I done to you? Why have you set me as your target? That I'm a burden to myself. Why don't you just pardon my sin, take away my iniquity? Right now, all I want to do is die, and you will seek me diligently, but I will no longer be. In other words, pardon my transgressions and let me die. Just let me die. That's it.
That's always a good thing to say.
That's it. If I have sinned, Job is saying, what shall I do to come back? You are my preserver. You are the watcher of men. You are the one that's able to bring me back. The Lord, what shall I do to come back? You have to do that. I can't do anything about it. You have to do it. So why are you doing this? In essence, Job is asking, why are you allowing this to happen to me? Why are you going through this? And so pardon my transgressions. If there's something I've sinned against you that you can't forgive, I need to know that too. Now think about this idea. In all of the Bible, the only thing that we read that God will not forgive is what we call the blasphemy of the Spirit.
Holy Spirit.
And what is that sin? Well, the Spirit, what does the Spirit do? The Spirit is the one who gives us God's word.
That's the sin leading to death.
Yeah.
That's
And
what
if
he
we
said.
refuse God's word,
That's what John said.
then what else can we do? We can't receive forgiveness if we're refusing to obey our Lord. We can't
They
do
said they anoint them with oil. Whenever they did that this time too.
it. Yeah.
Anoint them with oil, pray over them.
In a lot of those situations they did. A lot of the oil at that time did have a lot of, it wasn't just oil, but it was certain kinds of spices and stuff mixed with it that did have some medicinal qualities to it.
Like extra virgin olive oil.
Yeah.
That's what they've used, olives, right?
They would use olives, but then they would also put in some other, my wife and some ladies nowadays have certain oils like thyme and this other stuff, and they mix the stuff up, and you can actually put some in on a wound, and it's supposed to help it feel better.
Yeah.
So it does happen today. So Job here is telling God finally, he said, now I shall sleep in the dust. Obviously, his pain is getting worse. Obviously, he figures his time is coming to an end. And Lord, I'm not going to be here much longer. And that's what he's saying. He says, now I will lie down in the dust and you will seek me diligently. Well, God knows exactly what's going on. God knows the moment he was going to die. But he says, it's going to be too late then. So how long? How long? All right. We'll pick up with chapter 8 next week. All right. At this rate, we're obviously going to, what I'm trying to do here is we're not going to be able to cover the whole chapter book. Okay. We're going to do the best we can. But I'm hoping that we've gone into these details on these 2 or 3 speeches with Eliphaz and Job. Job has now given us 2. Eliphaz has given us 1. Now we're going to read Bildad's next week, and then we'll go into Zophar's, and we'll see Job's response and all of that. There's 3 series of these. There's probably not going to be a way we're going to be able to go through all of them as deeply as we are now. But I want you to get the gist of them. And then we'll try to hit those heavy points, because as I said, this is a book of 42 chapters. Is that right? Yeah, 42 chapters. And we got a lot of ground to cover. But it's going to take some time to do it if we go through every verse the way we have. But if you get the gist, then as you read through it from here on out, then you'll see what he's trying to say. All right. I love the book. It teaches us a lot about suffering. It teaches us a lot about the idea that it's not just because of man's sin. There's a lot of other things going on behind the scenes. We a lot of times jump to conclusions that, well, they must have lived a wicked life, you know.
Well, there's definitely stuff going on in the spiritual realm, because he tells about that in Daniel.
Yeah.
Talks about they're in battle.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a demon on a person, then there's an angel, usually. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's not assuming anything. That's like common knowledge.
Right.
So, I don't know. There's always, I mean, it seems that God has to be able to, he has to back up sometimes and be able, otherwise it wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
But I think that someone was talking about this. I can't remember what the subject was, but you open yourself up to it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
If you're persistent in sin, that's stepping outside of Christ.
That's right.
That's not like some people were talking about that. Like, you can come under oppression.
That's
You
right.
can. So
That's exactly
that,
right.
Paul talks about that being a slave again or something like that.
Yeah.
A slave. to
Will you
sin.
be enslaved again to sin? Yeah.
Yeah.
Appreciate you guys. Hang in there. And thank you so much.
Thank you too.
All right, brother.
I don't know where we. I'm gonna give it to you. You can put it back for me.
Yeah, I'll
'Cause
put
I
it
don't know
back. Yeah,
exactly.
I'll put it back. Thank you. Take care, and God willing, I'll see you next week. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
No, I'm fine.
All right, then. Thank you much.